Sure. Okay, thank you.
Why don't I say a few words? We don't need to record it anyway, as long as you can see me. So just say hi, everybody. Good to see you. Thank you, Geshe, for teaching us this course. As usual, we are very appreciative. And we've just had, as every week, the review course in Hebrew, and I cannot recommend enough to make a review over the teachings. Such a privilege. So thank you so much, Geshe, and we can start the lead.
Great. Thank you. Okay, so as usual, we start with some breathing meditation. And then in the space in front of you, visualize Buddha Shakyamuni, who's the same nature as your Lama. And a manifestation of all the qualities we can also attain. Manifestation of all the enlightened qualities. And then think that the Buddha is surrounded by all the great masters of the past who attained realizations and dependence on the Buddha's teachings. The masters of the Nalanda tradition like Nagarjuna, Ayadeva, and so forth. The great Mahasiddhas or accomplished yogis of India. The Tibetan masters. And of other traditions. All of them inspiring us to practice in such a way that we ourselves attain the same realizations and eventually become enlightened. Since we can attain that state only due to the kindness of sentient beings, think that you're surrounded by all mother sentient beings. Suffering in different ways. are all having the same root affliction, the root ignorance, giving rise to all their problems. While the nature of the mind is not different from the nature of the mind of a Buddha. And so focusing on each and every one of these sentient beings, generate affectionate love. An indiscriminate feeling of closeness and deep care and affection. No matter what their state of mind may be right now. And then while focusing on their suffering and its causes, generate great compassion. An affectionate awareness that wishes for all sentient beings to be free from their suffering and its causes. And in particular, aspires to protect them from all their suffering and its causes. And then allow for your great compassion to grow stronger. And give way to the determination to do whatever is necessary to practice as hard as possible. To be able to protect sentient beings from their suffering and its causes. And in that way, give rise to the altruistic attitude. And then, based on the understanding that we can only be really effective in our effort to help sentient beings remove all their suffering and its causes, once we're enlightened, generate the wish, the aspiration to attain the state of a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. And think that it's with this aspiration that I will continue to study Chandrakirti's text. And then to further deepen your motivation, let's recite the prayers. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, of practicing generosity, and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits, of practicing generosity, and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened, to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. And may all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And then directed at the front visualization. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginning this time. And rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. And turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to the great enlightenment. All right, thank you. Okay, so for this coming week, as usual, or as we've been doing for quite a while now, taking bodhicitta, renewing this over and over again, tirelessly if we can, over and over, reminding ourselves, starting in the morning, of course. Last thing we should do before we fall asleep is again generate the mind of enlightenment, but then also, of course, throughout the day to renew it over and over again. But to not just focus on the method side of the practice, but also bring in or combine this practice of, well, in this case, the mind of enlightenment, combine it with an understanding of reality, with wisdom. Focus on, well, for this week, the course's type of selflessness. So the course's type is the lack of, as I said last week, the lack of a permanent, partless, and independent self. Now, this is considered to be the course's type in that understanding that such a self does not exist is easier than the other types that we'll go through. I mean, parts of them we've already discussed. Well, we've actually, except for the one the lack of a permanent, partless, independent self. We've discussed the other ones as part of our study of Chandrakirti's text. But anyway, this one, this particular type, the fact that there's no permanent, partless, independent self, and understanding that, well, we'll do this in combination again with bodhicitta. And this is easiest. It's easier to understand than the other types. It still takes some time. And as I also mentioned last time, we do have a sense, we do have an awareness that may at times think, well, there's a self, there is a separate entity, a totally independent I that doesn't change, as in like, well, sometimes we actually literally think, oh, I never change. Or there is a sense, I'm exactly the same that I was, I don't know, some time ago, however long that period may be. A sense that I'm the same I was 10 years ago. I mean, sometimes people have the sense, well, yeah, I've aged, but I'm still the same. So my body has aged, my mind has kind of changed, but I'm still the same person. It feels like I'm still the same. It's like, how could I age? How could I get older? How did this happen? I'm still the same person. So that is a clear indication that there's a sense of the I now and the I of the past being the same, being identical, which is another way of saying the self, the I is permanent. So having that sense of this separate entity, having this sense of this permanent self, and having the sense that, yeah, mind and body have parts, but the I doesn't really have any parts, because what would be its parts? Well, mind and body. But since it's totally separate from them, how can they be the parts of the I if they're like totally separate from them? They're like totally independent of each other. Now, I probably mentioned this before, but if I didn't, well, I need to definitely stress the fact that we don't have such a sense of a self, of a permanent, partless, independent self. We don't have that innately. We're not born with such a self, but it still develops as part of our education, part of our philosophical view, our religious view. I may have mentioned before, well, for instance, the idea of a separate soul. Like in these movies, you know, like sometimes there are these, in these movies, I remember when I was a teenager, I used to like to watch these kind of horror movies with like someone snatching your soul. Anyway, so about this snatching your soul, what does that actually mean? Like as if there were an I that could be snatched, that could be, I don't know, could be taken out, could be sucked out, whatever. So anyway, that is an indication of a sense that we have, well, a sense of something totally separate. So that there's an independent soul, if you like, that can be actually separated in such a way. So anyway, to focus on the fact that such is impossible, even without going into the subtler versions of selflessness, but just be aware that there is no such separate I, not for others and not for ourselves. And of course, the I is always changing. And check, do you have your own? I mean, do you have a self yourself? You yourself have a sense that you're not changing, you're always the same. And of course, with other people as well. And we'll notice that I mentioned that last time, if we bear a grudge, if we hold a grudge and we have a sense that's the same person who's harmed me. Of course, you just this sense of things being the same, whatever happened, like the object in the past is the same object now. We have that also with inanimate objects. It's the same mountain I saw 5 years ago and what have you. But of course, it's more of an issue, more of a problem with people, with other sentient beings, in particular with other humans, with other people. Anyway, so pay extra attention to this, spend this week on focusing on the fact that such a separate entity cannot exist, even though we don't have an innate sense of it. But like I said, we still have a mind that apprehends this based on our education, our views, etc. And then combine it, of course, with the mind of enlightenment. So bring your understanding, kind of change back to the mind of enlightenment, your love and compassion. And of course, very important, your mind of enlightenment is carried by deep love and compassion. It's said they're conjoined. Well, no, conjoined, no more. It's like a cause. It's like the cause of the love and compassion. That's why we, if your mind of enlightenment, that's why we keep saying for the benefit of all sentient beings. So the mind itself is focused on enlightenment, on one's own enlightenment. That's what the mind aspires towards, but driven by this deep love and compassion. So when you focus on bodhicitta, kind of bring back that love and compassion for sentient beings. If it's not there, I mean, make an effort to allow for it to arise. And then spend a moment to reflect on the fact that there's no sentient being, whether human, animal, or anything else, any other form of existence that has such a permanent part as independent self. Okay. So that should be enough for this week, as and what I'd like you to do, I'd like you to focus on. Then actually, Tao City, he sent me a few questions and I meant to answer them, but I was a little busy before class, so I didn't get time to read through it once again and to make sure I'll answer them correctly. I mean, I think they're not questions so much, but well, like a mixture between comments and questions. So I'll definitely do it next week. But something that I just went through my mind throughout this week, really, in relation to what Jimmy asked last time, what I also addressed one of his questions was, if you regard your Lama as, like, if you consider your Lama to be a Buddha, would you generate compassion towards your Lama? And I think I answered that. But just if you don't consider your Lama to be a Buddha, which it's not necessary, you don't need to, I mean, unless you practice Tantra, you don't need to consider your Lama to be a Buddha. And even then, you're of course allowed to say, you're allowed to disagree and respectfully say, well, I cannot follow your advice, etc. I mean, kind of, you don't have to agree with everything and so forth. But still, if you don't practice this, which I like I said, it's not absolutely necessary, especially on the sutric level. So if you could regard your Lama as, well, definitely more advanced than yourself, but still having problems, so would you generate compassion for them? So I was just thinking about this, and my very first thought was like, that's not appropriate, almost like it's not appropriate. But I think the reason for thinking so is almost that we sometimes confuse compassion with pity, like a condescending kind of attitude. So pity, of course, is not compassion. It's got that condescending quality to it, kind of looking down on someone. And it's quite interesting that I guess we have like a general sense of that, possibly. I mean, even in Tibetan, I'm just reminded of something that Tibetans say. For instance, it's actually a very beautiful custom that they have. When they see another person who suffers, they say ninje. Ninje means compassion, right? Ninje is just the Tibetan word for compassion. So they see a person and say, oh, ninje. So, which is almost like, if you translate it into English, though it means compassion, but in English, you would say, oh, this poor person, oh, look at this poor guy, what he or she is experiencing. So it's this reaction, oh, poor thing, right? So similarly, Tibetans keep saying, oh, ninje, ninje. It's very beautiful. With every time you see someone has a problem, you say ninje. But you cannot use this term for a Lama. You can only use it, you cannot use it for someone who, in terms of like in terms of the hierarchy, I mean, even if there isn't a hierarchy, but with the Lama, of course, there's a certain hierarchy there. I mean, in terms of ourselves, and then the Lama, considering that Lama to be above ourselves. I mean, not in a negative sense, but still, you don't say it for a Lama. You wouldn't say, oh, ninja, that Lama. No, you don't use it. So it almost got a sense, if you use it for someone, they're equal, or below, kind of in terms of their standing, whatever, especially spiritual standing. And that again is that's just how the word is used in daily life. But this doesn't actually mean that compassion is such, that compassion can only be experienced. And I think this is where it's important for us. Compassion comes with respect for another person. So therefore, there's really no fault. Yeah, I mean, traditionally, the custom of Tibetans, you don't use the word ninja for lamas, and that's totally fine. But can you have compassion for anyone who's got suffering, including someone who's highly advanced, who's not yet a Buddha, but is highly advanced, and still have compassion? Well, yeah, because it's not pity. In that, it is actually a mind of affection, of closeness towards another person. So you can have that towards anyone. Doesn't matter their standing, their spiritual qualities, and so forth. And it's just the wish, the sincere wish for that person to be free from suffering. So it comes also with respect. It comes with respect. I mean, we should have respect for all sentient beings. So not to kind of have pity for them in that sense, like, oh, they're suffering, and kind of almost belittling them, or looking down on them in that sense, but rather having respect for whoever it is, and then this feeling of closeness, of affection, and the wish for them to be free from suffering. And it also, I might as well, since I'm talking about compassion, and compassion, of course, is the driving force of bodhicitta. So focusing on bodhicitta this week, that means you focus on your practice of compassion towards all sentient beings, which means respect, but also, and this is another misunderstanding, and Jimmy didn't ask about that, but just remember that, and I think I've stressed it before, but might as well say it again. Sometimes people feel compassion, meaning that you have to focus on the suffering of sentient beings, will pull you down, will depress you, will make your life even harder than it is. On top of carrying your own suffering, you now need to, focus on the suffering of others and carry that as well. So for a lot of people, there's this sense, oh, that's just so tiring, which again is a misunderstanding of compassion. It's not meant to sadden us. It's not meant to depress us, but rather it's a type of mind that, if it's done in the right way, should give us incredible inner strength, courage and inner strength. Almost like, wow, there's suffering, I need to do something. So great, not great in the sense really great, but in like, wow, there's me, I can do something now. There's really a need for me to at least mentally, as far as I can. Sometimes physically we can't do anything, but at least mentally to include, of course, this person in my endeavor to attain enlightenment in my practice. So I'm doing this for the benefit of this person. Of course, not as an excuse, I'm just doing it mentally, not doing anything for anyone. No, but I guess by now you understand what I'm saying. So the point is that with respect for the other person, and without being pulled down by their suffering and so forth, but rather to generate the sense, I need to do something even more. So there's so much suffering, even more. So I need to become enlightened. So to make that a cause for you to be even more determined than before. Understand, of course, that their suffering is impermanent. It is impermanent. It's just no inherent, non-changing suffering, which is also the sense we may have suffering, which we may have, and therefore that kind of sense of suffering may pull us down even further. So, like I said, bringing compassion together with wisdom means that, especially when I talk about compassion being or giving rise to a type of determination and inner strength, where your understanding of impermanence, that things do not remain the same, that suffering eventually comes to an end. Of course, new suffering arises, but it's not always the same. It doesn't exist intrinsically as suffering, and so forth. That based on that understanding, you're able to focus on the suffering of others and generate the determination, I'll do it, I'll have to do something, I will do something, may I be able to protect them, and so forth, from the suffering and so forth. So just those two aspects I wanted to stress again. To summarize, compassion comes with respect and inner strength. All right. So that was just something I meant to add from last week's question. Okay, then let's go back to the text. Where did we get to? What verse did we get to? It's chapter 11, the last chapter. I thought it was verse 9 that we finished. Yes, I think we finished verse 9 of the 11th chapter. The qualities of the 10 grounds and the resultant ground. That's the chapter we're at right now. And we finished the first 9 verses, did I say chapters? The first 9 verses of the 11th chapter. The first 9 verses basically describe the incredible qualities of someone on the Bodhisattva path, which I like stressed last time. It's pretty overwhelming. It's difficult to fathom. It's difficult to grasp. But nonetheless, well, it definitely gives us an incentive, or it possibly moves us in a direction where we open our mind to other possibilities. So to become aware that our perception of reality right now is really a reflection of our very limited, well, sense of reality based on our misapprehension of a self, of phenomena existing inherently, the self existing inherently, and especially our self-grasping. In that context, something else I thought of during this week, it's like our entire life revolves around ourselves. It's incredible. Like, actually, if you compare it to a Buddha, and it's so difficult to compare to a Buddha, or even like a Bodhisattva, it's so difficult to compare because we've got no experience of that. Literally, I mean, we've not, well, unless you're Bodhisattvas, but I mean, in my case, I've got no sense really of what a Bodhisattva is like. So I can only intellectually maybe grasp it to a certain extent. Why? Because everything revolves around myself. So everything, my entire life is just me. And that's so interesting. Why when we're having this kind of self-centered attitude and self-cherishing, we take things personally all the time. We think it's about me. So when someone, I don't know, while driving, or when you're in the queue in the supermarket and someone kind of pushes their way through and what have you, so we take it personally. How dare they? And actually, if we had the understanding of where the other person is coming from, maybe they have to rush to a funeral, or I don't know, they have some important appointment or someone is waiting for them, etc. Like, they have a really good reason to rush. Then it's suddenly all right. But because we're just so busy with ourselves, we take it personally. So the point being, we just see ourselves, we just see our own, and we can't see anything else. And therefore, our existence is really a reflection of that narrow-mindedness. It's like a horse wearing blinkers, it's like just seeing me. And if we can kind of reduce this and eventually totally overcome that, there's so much we perceive. There's so many possibilities, really. And of course, our mind and our body eventually manifests in such a way, well, we can have more than one body acting, interacting with other people. And in that way, well, like a bodhisattva, starting on the first ground, emanating many sentient beings, different sentient beings, and benefiting others. Anyway, without going into this further, it's pretty mind-boggling, but just because our mind is just not used to think along these lines. But now we'll start with the resultant ground. So that's verse 10, which is really now discussing the Buddha. So going from overwhelming to Buddhahood. No, that's the 10th chapter. 10:1 means Dalit. 10:1 means 10th chapter, first verse. But we're now at 11th chapter. So 11:9, 11.9. At the end of the verse, you always have the chapter. Yeah, there it is. So 11.10 should be it. Sorry, 9 was the last verse we did last time. So it's 11.10. So the 11th chapter and the 10th verse of the 11th chapter. So what does that describe now? The resultant ground. Previously, the first 9 chapters, the first 9 verses of this last chapter quickly went through the different grounds, describing them in terms of all the qualities in a different way than we had Chandrakirti described them in the earlier chapters. And now he describes Buddhahood. So it's even more overwhelming. All right, so what does it say here? That the first verse, the 10th verse, or the first verse of the description of the Buddha. So just for example, when you take as an analogy, the moonlight in a cloudless sky, it can shine brightly for all those traveling at night. So likewise, someone on the 10th ground, who's still a bodhisattva, is now able to clear away all the obscurations, and now reach the state of a Buddha. So eliminate whatever is left to be eliminated, and now, well, to reach stripes on the ground that gives rise to the 10 powers. So that's still the last ground of bodhisattvas, and then is already serving like a moonlight in a cloudless sky, but then strives once again, strives further, and then attains on the 10th ground, will then attain the ground of a Buddha. Sorry, the 10 powers are not the 10 powers of a bodhisattva, but the 10 powers of a Buddha. So on that ground, on the 10th ground of a bodhisattva, he once again strives to then reach the 10 powers, the powers of a Buddha. So it's that supreme state, supreme peace. That is the object of striving of a bodhisattva. And that is what the bodhisattva now will reach in Akanishta. Here it says in Akanishta. So that means Akanishta, it's a Sanskrit word. It's a realm, Womin in Tibetan, which kind of means there's nothing below. So Woming, yeah. So here, Akanishta, actually there are 2 types, at least 2 different types of Akanishta. One is actually part of samsara. It's the highest form realm. That's not the Akanishta we're talking about here. It's also called Akanishta. Of the different form realms, we're in the desire realm, and then there's the form realm and the formless realm. And within the form realm, the highest level you can achieve is called Akanishta. But we're not talking about that. Here we're talking about some kind of Buddha field, or Buddha, pure realm, if you like. Now, this is not to be confused with Tantra. In Tantra, you have different Buddha fields, different pure realms. That's different. There's some similarity, but it's not the same. So here it's just the sutric point of view. From the sutric point of view, when someone reaches the 10th ground, has reached the 10th ground, this person's mind, the mind can be in different places, of course, because they can emanate in different ways, but that which emanates, these different emanations, so the emanator, for lack of a better word, that which actually, the actual person who now emanates different beings as a bodhisattva, that emanates different beings, manifests different forms, that person will now become enlightened in this pure realm called Akanishta. So they become enlightened in Akanishta, and then all the different emanations, well, they're basically together with that, become enlightened, if you like. I don't think they absorb. No, I don't think they're all absorbed, but I forget now exactly, do they absorb or not? But no, I remember one of my teachers definitely saying that in Akanishta, the mind becomes enlightened, And then in the desire realm, or wherever these different emanations are, they become enlightened in these different realms. So therefore, the actual person, the person who emanates, the bodhisattva who emanates these different manifestations, well, they're in Akanishta, and they become enlightened in Akanishta, in this densely arrayed Akanishta, as it's also sometimes described, or it's usually called, if you like. Anyway, so this place, Akanishta, is where a 10th ground of bodhisattva attains the state of a Buddha. All right. Now, what Lama Tsongkhapa explains, he says, for instance, or as the commentaries explain, so in the commentaries, it is clearly stated that, yes, the actual enlightenment takes place in Akanishta. And if now a being, if we, for instance, Buddha Shakyamuni, we can, well, 2,600 years ago, people were witness, or well, they were not possibly aware of it, but some of them possibly were aware of the Buddha becoming enlightened. So a debate that could arise would be, well, did the Buddha become not enlightened in Akanishta, but in this world? And the answer to this is that the Buddha was already enlightened. Many of you know this. So the Buddha merely manifested enlightenment at Bodh for our benefit, to show us how to do it, etc. But that he was already enlightened. So this is different to some other Buddhist tradition, in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, which is based on the Nalanda tradition. Well, the Buddha was already enlightened, but manifested enlightenment at Bodh and at other places as well, of course, many different emanations acting in different world systems. We talked about galaxies and world systems last week. And so it makes sense that the Buddha, well, even right now, the same, well, Buddha Shakyamuni, who was called Buddha Shakyamuni 2,600 years ago, at the same time, of course, the mental continuum of the Buddha is still around, and the Buddha manifests exactly these activities of a fully enlightened Buddha becoming enlightened and so forth, turning the wheel of Dharma in some other world system. Okay, so that's, like I'm saying, someone according to the Sutric system would become enlightened only in Akanishta, but can manifest enlightenment in the way Buddha Shakyamuni did, in such a way that's just a manifestation, just a, it's not actual enlightenment that happened in the case of Buddha Shakyamuni. All right, so this is what this is saying here, Akanishta, that's why it's mentioned. Hope it's not too confusing, but yeah, it's this kind of pure realm, and it's only this mentioned. Of course, in a Tantra, you have all these different pure realms. It's a lot more complicated than that, but we're talking about Sutra here, so yeah, it's in that regard less complicated. All right, so in Akanishta, the Bodhisattva will find the object of his striving, supreme peace in the form of full enlightenment, which is really the unexcelled wisdom, the unexcelled primordial wisdom, and basically the ultimate culmination of all positive qualities. Okay, so unrivaled, it's unrivaled as the ultimate culmination of all good qualities. So in other words, Bodhisattva already on the 10th ground, being so highly evolved for us, I mean, mind-boggling, very difficult to fathom, then still's got a little bit work to do. His mind then abiding, whereas his original form, if you like, abiding in Akanishta, attains the fully enlightened state of a Buddha. All right. So, and then it goes on to say in verse 11, and just as space, so space is indistinguishable even within different vessels. I'm not talking about impermanent space. It's the idea of space that's a little bit difficult initially to grasp, this idea. I'm not talking about the impermanent space that we can actually, we can perceive, we can see, I mean, it's all around us basically. No, it's looking at space in a slightly different way, looking at it from the point of view of the lack of obstructive contact. Just the absence of something obstructing my hand as I'm moving my hand. There's the absence of obstructing that. That absence of obstructive contact, of some obstruction, that absence is an abstract phenomenon. It's a permanent phenomenon. Permanent in the sense that it's not a dynamic thing, it's static. Doesn't mean that it can't go away, I can't go out of existence. But the point being, it's something permanent, something abstract. It's just the absence of obstructive contact. And wherever there, you can move your hand, in other words. So whether it's in a vessel or in a cupboard or in a car, you always have this permanent space, that non-obstructive entity or non-obstructive phenomenon. And that's indistinguishable. It's indistinguishable one another. It's just this absence of obstructive contact. It's usually an analogy for emptiness, right? Emptiness is just the absence of inherent existence, all right? So inherent existence of a car, inherent existence of a table, it's not much of a difference. It's just the absence. I mean, the basis is different, but it's just this negation of something that has never existed. Now, this permanent space, it's the absence of something which in some other places does exist. Obstructive contact exists. You know, when you have like exactly where the table is, then there is obstruction because I can't move my hand. In the empty spaces of the table, you know, between the legs and so forth, there's some absence of obstructive contact, but there's also obstructive contact itself. So there's the absence of obstructive contact in some places and obstruction. Okay, but the point being that although the object that is negated, when we say space refers to the absence of obstructive contact. So what is negated? It's obstructive contact that exists, different to emptiness, where that which is negated is inherent existence, which exists nowhere, has never existed anywhere. So despite that difference, or even though there's this difference between the two, yet we use the lack of obstructive contact, that absence of just obstruction, as an analogy for emptiness. All right, so it's often used, it's just an absence of obstructiveness or of an obstructive contact, as it's usually translated. Whereas emptiness, or in comparison, emptiness is just the absence of inherent existence. And like I say, of course, inherent existence doesn't exist, obstructive contact does exist in general, but other than that, they're very similar. Okay, and so having said this, here, the space that is mentioned here is this permanent space. So just the space remains indistinguishable, even within different vessels. Okay, wherever you have some empty space, you have some, like in a vessel, you have like the inside, there's nothing in there, so it's like like an empty space. I mean, there's just some air in there, right? So because there's nothing in there, you talk about an absence of obstructive contact, and that absence of obstructive contact is the same everywhere, really, in those different vessels. Likewise, no differentiation of phenomena exists in suchness. So within suchness, phenomena just lack inherent existence. The differentiation of phenomena only happens on a conventional level. On an ultimate level, when we talk about the ultimate truth, it's just the lack of inherent existence. So for a Buddha, since he or she perfectly realizes everything in terms of a single taste, the taste of lack of inherent existence, the Buddha, the excellent mind, perceives the knowables in a single instant, it says, right? So again, for a Buddha's mind, phenomena, and this is again kind of hard for us to fathom. As I said, once we talk about the Buddha, well, with our limited sense of reality, it's hard to understand. And it takes some time to make our mind a little bit more flexible, but never mind. I mean, that's why we're doing this. This is why Chandrakirti talks about it. So basically what it says, that for a Buddha, everything is the taste of emptiness. Everything is this of the same taste, which really means the Buddha realizes the lack of inherent existence of all phenomena while perceiving all phenomena. We can't do that. And it's mentioned in a few verses later. It mentions this again. It kind of clarifies this. For us, our mind can only do one of two things. Either it realizes the lack of inherent existence of something, and it can no longer understand, know that mind itself. It can only know the lack of inherent existence of, let's say, a table. In that moment, it cannot know table. It cannot know table and its lack of inherent existence. It can switch back and forth, but the same mind can't do it. And while it knows the table, it cannot know the lack of inherent existence of the table. It can only do one of the two, one of those two. So a Buddha's mind can do both. For a Buddha's mind, there's the table, the conventionally existent table, and its lack of inherent existence. The mind has the capacity to know both truth at the same time with regard to one particular object. So therefore, everything is of the same taste. Yes, this exists conventionally, but it's got the taste of emptiness. It lacks inherent existence. So therefore, the Buddha's mind is not limited to either or, right? Like either perceive lack of inherent existence or perceive the conventional reality. In other words, either perceive ultimate reality or conventional reality. No. And therefore, the Buddha's mind, not being limited in that way, can know anything. There's no restriction to the mind of a Buddha. Our restriction comes because we can only see one aspect or the other. And that restriction, well, it's not the only restriction, but due to that inability to see both truth simultaneously, whatever obstructs our mind from doing that also obstructs our mind from knowing everything else. We can take one object to mind and then switch to other things. You know, we can think of certain things like when you analyze, first you think of this, then you think of that, you go back and forth, but simultaneously you cannot know, right? I mean, there's this whole debate even with your, and I'm talking here of the mental consciousness, but taking the sense consciousnesses, how much can you know in one moment, right? I mean, if you've got this whole room full of stuff, we zoom into things, we look at this and look at that, and it seems simultaneous maybe at times, but there's this whole debate. Are we just quickly one after the other taking things in? So how much can you actually know in one moment? But the point being, you can't know everything at the same time. There's certain things we can know simultaneously, but the point being here, a Buddha's mind doesn't have these limitations in that we can know certain things possibly simultaneously, but not everything simultaneously. So these restrictions are gone. And this is what this says. All right. So therefore, just as space is indistinguishable for a Buddha, there's no differentiation when it comes to suchness. And in particular, when it comes to, oh yeah, I'm good with time. In particular, when it comes to, well, phenomena like the emptiness, since everything is of a single taste, while at the same time still appearing in different ways, therefore the Buddha can know all phenomena. But now there's a debate. In verse 12, someone says, well, if the ultimate reality, if emptiness, the lack of intrinsic existence, well, if that is just an absence of intrinsic existence or inherent existence, well, there really is no object. There isn't any object. So here, I mean, it's either this, it's probably more the idea, well, if something lacks inherent existence, it can't exist at all. It's that, or it doesn't specify who's the opponent here or the person who presents this debate. But anyway, it could also mean, and this is quite interesting, a sense people have that if something is just a negation of something, you can't know it. A mere negation is not knowable. I hear this a lot, actually, when sometimes on the radio or whatever, I read it somewhere, where people make these statements, if it's just a negation, how can you know it? We have a sense we can only know things that are affirmative. So here they say, the opponent says, well, if you posit the pacification, the ultimate reality of like a pacification of intrinsic existence. And if you say this is the ultimate reality, then you have to say that the mind will never perceive it. But there cannot be knowledge of an object without the mind. So first the person says, well, if what you describe as ultimate reality, if you say it exists, then the problem is there's no mind that can perceive it. But you cannot say that something exists without knowledge of it. But if it cannot be known, it cannot exist. So there cannot be knowledge of an object without the mind as a knowing subject or as a knowing entity. So subject here means that which knows, as a knowing subject or that which knows. And in the absence of a knowing mind, what knowledge can there be? So if there's no knowing mind, how can you talk about knowledge of emptiness in this case? So that's a contradiction in terms, saying that there's no knowing, but there's knowledge. That's not possible. And also with no knower, how can you teach about it to others, saying it is thus? So if I were to teach it to others, but I don't know it, then there's no knowing mind because there's no object to be known. In other words, how can you teach it to others? Right? So that's the argument here. So the main argument is emptiness can't exist. It's just a negation of something. Well, either on the basis of things have to exist inherently, or emptiness is just a negation of something. How could something, just a mere negation of something, has no affirmative quality? How can that be known? And if it cannot be known, there's no mind to know it. If there's no mind to know it, there's no knowledge. And if there's no knowledge, there's no one who can teach it. Now, this is what this person says. And in response to that, Chandrakirti says, well, for you, for instance, he gives this example of just as for you, when no rising is suchness, and that mind too has no rising. So he actually, well, just as for you, let's start with the third line, verse 13. So just as for you, when the mind arises or takes on the aspect of an object, such as blue, for instance, right? So if you have a mind, this is, some of you may not be familiar with that, but this idea that your mind arises in the aspect of, let's say, blue, when you perceive blue, or when you perceive a table, your mind arises in the aspect of the object. What does that mean? The object appears to it, right? It's not like you have to insert a table into your eye consciousness or blue into your eye consciousness. Of course, the object, the blue object, is an external object. It may be further away from you, from your consciousness, and still our consciousness can know it. It knows it by way of the mind taking on the aspect of the object. So taking on the aspect of the object is just another way of saying it appears to the mind. You can take, of course, modern science when they talk about the retina. It's like the object is reflected in the retina like a mirror, but just upside down and so forth. Anyway, all this is totally valid from a Buddhist point of view. There's no contradiction, except in Buddhism, they don't talk about what happens exactly with the eye organ, but rather they talk about what happens after the eye organ, the sense faculty, and so forth have interacted with the object. What happens to the mind? It's focusing on the mind. And so the mind, it appears to the mind. You know, from experience, if you just look around, with the sense consciousness, the thing is appearing to your mind. So it takes on the aspect of the object. And even with your mental consciousness, conceptually, the object is no longer around you. It appears to your mind. You can think about it. And how do you think about the object? By way of the object appearing to your mind. Close your eyes. Think of the things around you in your room. They appear. Not exactly in the same way as they appeared to the sense consciousnesses as you look at them, not with the same clarity, but still they appear. So therefore, our mind knows an object by way of the object appearing to it. That is by way of the mind taking on the aspect of an object that it perceives. So just as for you, that happens with the objects such as a blue object, a table, or something else. Likewise, when the mind assumes the aspect that is emptiness or suchness, when the mind perceives suchness, then in dependence on worldly conventions, on a conventional level, we say the mind know or can know suchness. So it's in dependence on conventions. Of course, it's not saying on an ultimate level, this is conventional, of course, this is on a conventional level. When we talk about, well, the mind takes the object aspect of an object, it perceives it, there's certainty as to what has arisen and so forth. Then as to that happening, we label it was known, the mind has known. So in the same way, you can do this with blue or a car or what have you. You can do it with suchness, with the lack of inherent existence that appears through the mind, and it can be known, whether it's an affirming negative or not, it just can be known. You can know lack of obstructive contact when you move your hand. You can know another non-affirming negative is that there is no, I don't know, Donald Trump in your room. Absence of Donald Trump in your room. You know that right now. I mean, I don't think you're in a room where Donald Trump is present. So then, absence of Donald Trump in your room. You can know that. Okay, it's an absence, and you can still know that. Especially with your mental consciousness. I mean, your sense consciousnesses, they know shapes and colors, but your mental consciousness can know absence or lack of Donald Trump in your room. Okay, so by way of the absence of Donald Trump appearing to your mind. All right, it's an abstract object, but so is emptiness, even subtler, but still, I mean, abstract, even subtler than the lack of Donald Trump, but a non-affirming negation, nevertheless, or in the same way as the absence of Donald Trump in your room. So, therefore, when the no arising, so non-arising, no arising of like no inherent arising or no inherent existence, that is suchness of a particular object. And the mind itself, so the object is here the non-arising, non-inherent arising, that is suchness. And the mind, which also doesn't arise inherently, right? There's no inherent arising. We take that as an object. And the mind can know that because it also doesn't arise inherently. If the mind were to arise inherently, it couldn't know anything. So the mind lacks inherent existence and can know that particular aspect or that particular quality of the lack of inherent existence, and that is suchness. Then, if that happens, it too does this by assuming its aspect. As it were, the mind perceives suchness. So in that way, we can say the mind perceives suchness. So in other words, what verse 13 is telling us, we can start with the analogy, but we can also say, to start with the first line, well, lack of inherent existence is suchness. And the mind also lacks inherent existence. And because it lacks inherent existence, it has the ability, in dependence on other factors, therefore, to take on the aspect of that non-inherent existence, which is suchness. And based on taking on this aspect and having certainty of it, we then say the mind perceives suchness. The mind knows suchness, realizes suchness. And even by just it appearing to the mind, well, the mind, therefore, then taking on this aspect, perceives suchness. So taking on the aspect, here is the appearance, but the appearance in the sense of, therefore, perceiving the object. Of course, perceiving doesn't necessarily mean understanding. I mean, initially, the first step, before we understand emptiness, we have a correct assumption. We're convinced, at least, of emptiness. Like, we have a correct sense of it. We haven't completely understood it. But emptiness appears to the mind, and the mind perceives it, not through this incontrovertible knowledge, like knowing 100% emptiness, but being convinced of it at first, right? So the mind in that moment presents itself, appears to the mind, and there's perception taking place, awareness taking place. And that can happen just as you do that with an object that's blue, like the color blue, just as for you, Chandrakirti says to the opponent, the mind takes the aspect of any object, blue or what have you, it perceives it. And so we say, in dependence on convention, we say the mind knows blue, the mind knows subject, suchness, and so forth, just dependent on what aspect presents itself to the mind. We talk of knowing suchness, knowing this and that. Of course, it's also just labeled. Okay. So that is the answer to, to this debate that the other person presented. Hopefully not that difficult to understand after everything we studied. But what's important to know is that only once we attain Buddhahood, we can actually, this perception, as I just described, it's something, well, the mind assuming the aspect of something. Well, the mind is very limited in that it can only assume the aspect of this, and then let go of that, assume the aspect of something else, and so forth. Well, only once you become a Buddha, anything becomes an aspect of the mind. Anything can appear to the mind. Anything can be known by the mind. That seems like, no, but the mind can't do it. Of course the mind can do it. That's its nature. The mind, what is the definition of the mind? It says it has two basic qualities that every mind has in a limited way, but still has. It's clear and knowing. Clear in that anything can appear to it. It can take on any aspect. It's clear. You know, like in water, anything can be reflected in clear water or in a mirror, because they have this luminosity, that clarity. It's a little difficult, this word, like this clarity. But if you just think like anything can appear to it, the mind has that ability, and it can know its object. It has the ability to know its object. Every mind can do it. It's just the nature of mind. Our mind can also do that. Things can appear to it and we can know things, but it is limited in what it can know in each moment. And of course, certain things, yeah, right now they're beyond us. Emptiness, subtle impermanence, we don't know these objects, subtle objects. But they're hidden to us, not because our mind doesn't have the ability in general. They're hidden to us because there are these obstructions that keep the mind from knowing them. If you have a strong grasping onto the permanence of things, your mind is limited and your mind is obstructed by that from knowing the impermanence of phenomena. It's like the certain states of mind can obstruct not the ability for the mind to have something appear to it, for the mind to know something in general, but know specific things. If you hold onto the permanence of something, how will you know the impermanence? If you believe in ghosts, how will you know there are no ghosts, right? I mean, like, if you hold on to this, if you hold certain views very strongly, then that keeps your mind from knowing. So with inherent existence, I mean, it's all day long about my inherent I, right? And your inherent I as well, but your secondary, it's my inherent I, that's most important. So it's my inherent I all day long. How am I supposed to know the lack of inherent existence of my own mind if my mind is obstructed by me constantly reinforcing my sense of inherent existence, right? So a Buddha's mind is free from all these views, all these obstructions, and the mind does what the mind does. Knows, takes on any aspect, because there's nothing obstructing it. So Buddha is not some kind of fancy god or what have you. It's just a person who's finally, or a living being or whatever, yeah, a being, not a sentient being, because we say sentient beings are non-Buddhas, that's just how the term is used, but a living being whose mind has reached the state where it's free from these obstructions, right? And is now able to do the most amazing things. In comparison to us, it's like, wow. And wow, in the sense that can fully act, has achieved the fullest potential and show us how to get there. That's why Buddha is so precious. But it's really just labeled on the basis of having all this knowledge, because all the obstructions are gone. Okay, so, but our mind has this ability in general anyway, but in terms of what it can take to mind, it is limited in that respect. Okay, so therefore, that's an important point, that the Buddha can perceive, well, the true truth non-dualistically, in that phenomena inherent the lack of inherent existence of the table and the table can be known at the same time. There's no longer this gap. There's no longer this need to switch between the true truth, like mentally. No, you can know them directly. So like water being poured into water, if you like. So the mind and the lack of inherent existence, it's not like there's a distance or anything. It's like the object and the mind, there's no sense to the mind that they're separate. And they're only just conventionally, we talk of them separately. But there's not the sense the object is over there, lack of inherent existence is something different. No, not at all. But it's hard for us to really fathom that because we have no experience of it. It's like being blind since birth and trying to understand, what is it like to see blue? What is it like to, right? It's like our mind can't do it. So no surprise, you can be thinking that what is blue, what is red? You really, very limited. You can just get an intellectual sense. So you may think, oh, I don't even want to bother about that, about a Buddha, what do I care? But the problem, of course, is if you have no idea what is a Buddha, how do you generate bodhicitta, the mind that wishes to become enlightened? It would be like, who wants to be enlightened? That's so boring. I don't even know what it means. So we need to have a certain sense of what Buddhahood is. And of course, a certain sense of the effectiveness, how incredibly beneficial it is to be a Buddha. So that in order then for us being driven by deep love and compassion, and of course we have to develop these qualities, then to be driven to reach that same state and finally actualize our fullest potential. Okay, anyway, so, but now the text goes on to say, I'm just talking about a few things that are mentioned by Lama Tsongkhapa in his commentary, and of course we can't go into them. But now let's look at the qualities of the Buddha himself, the kayas, as they're called, the bodies, as they're called, like kaya, as in like, it's a body. I don't like to use the word kaya so much because it's really, it can mean body in certain context, but we're not talking about all the qualities of the Buddha being bodies, because the mind of a Buddha is not a body. I mean, we still have to distinguish between those two, mind and body. So I don't like to use the word body. I'll use the word kaya. I just use the Sanskrit word. So here's called the enjoyment body or the enjoyment kaya. Okay. Anyway, so the Buddha has, oh no, this is not yet. Sorry, this is not yet. The kayas, no, sorry, I this comes a little further. Now here it's talking about the enjoyment body. It doesn't mention it. So the actual existence of a Buddha, the emanator, the actual Buddha called the enjoyment body. It's not the emanations, but really the essence of Buddha himself, sustained by merit and through the force of his emanations from space and others. Wait, let me just, okay, let me not read them, but just explain step by step. It's easier that way. So anyway, so the Buddha's existence as an enjoyment body, as like the actual Buddha as a person, if you like, is sustained or created by the accumulations of merit. Okay, so merit, this potential, very difficult to put it into words. It's not something physical. Anyway, it's this merit that sustains the Buddha. In particular, the enjoyment body. So this existence of the Buddha. And it's through this merit that then the Dharma is taught. So the Buddha remains, the Buddha's mind is of the same taste as emptiness, perceives emptiness and still teaches. So where does that come from? Well, there's all this positive potential a Buddha has accumulated. Then there's the positive potential of other beings. And that there's no motivation, in other words, from the side of the Buddha. It's not like the Buddha it's like going intention. I mean, motivation in the sense as we have it. It's just a limited mind. Oh, I shall do this now. You do that. And then an effort is required to do something. No, the Buddha does so spontaneously through this incredible force of merit And then through that, the different sounds that teach the Dharma, they reverberate from the Buddha's body, declaring the truth of the ultimate reality of phenomena. And so from these, other beings come to understand suchness. All right. So in other words, the Buddha's mind doesn't function like our mind, kind of make a plan, do this, do that, make an effort. No, the Buddha's mind spontaneously realizes everything that exists, understands all phenomena. There's this incredible positive force driven by love and compassion, right? So this positive potential here is really this, really, again, how do you put it into word, but this positive energy or whatever, this positive potential or merit that has arisen from this incredible love and compassion, that is the force now that the driving force between the Buddha spontaneously teaching, so the sound reverberating, declaring the truth, I mean the ultimate reality, but of course also the conventional truth, but mainly teaching emptiness, teaching it to this world so that this world comes to understand. So the beings around, the sentient beings that the Buddha teaches, they also come to understand suchness. Okay, that should be enough for today. So it's a little difficult. It's like this crazy abstract kind of way of talking, but in the way to understand. And for this, you should really read Lama Tsongkhapa's commentary. It's very helpful. I mean, I don't have much time to go through everything Lama Tsongkhapa says, but based on what I just said, if you could read Illuminating the Intent, the translation of Lama Tsongkhapa's commentaries, because he gives these beautiful details to it. So to get a sense of how the mind of a Buddha works, what is the difference? That, of course, we have all the ingredients for the mind of a Buddha. We have all this right there, except it's not functioning to the same degree. It's very limited because of, well, the obscurations, the obstructions in our own mind that limit ourselves, that limit the mind itself. So to get a sense, therefore, the possibilities when there's an enlightened mind, how it functions on the basis of the spaciousness of that realization of all phenomena simultaneously, and still being able to teach exactly according to sentient beings' needs and so forth. I mean, if everything appears to you and you know all phenomena, how do you teach, right? For us, if I were to, if in each moment I were to, let's say hypothetically, I could know all phenomena, I'd be just like staring around and I couldn't do anything, right? I'm able to teach because I can take one thing to mind, think about it, make a plan, and then talk about it, right? So in each moment, there's a motivation to do so. It doesn't seem that way, but there is. So I can talk about this and that, but it's very limited. A Buddha is like everything is appearing to the mind of a Buddha. So how's the Buddha able? How's the Buddha not totally overwhelmed by all that? Well, because the Buddha is because of the merit, that love, that compassion, and then spontaneously manifests teachings according to beings' needs, right? Beings' needs, beings' predisposition, their interests, and so forth. Okay, so it's really hard to put this into words, but maybe it gives us a kind of a rough sense of this. Okay, anyway, time is up. We'll continue next time, and now spend a few minutes just meditating on what we've just learned. All right. Okay. So it was a lot today. Oh, I haven't really summarized what I talked about today, but I'll do it in the meditation. Hopefully that'll suffice. But before we start meditating, let go of any confusion, feeling overwhelmed with whatever you've understood today or not understood, and just breathe and focus on your breath. So in order to effectively generate bodhicitta, or the mind of enlightenment, a type of mind that helps us to progress, so that we'll eventually enter the Mahayana path. It is essential to get a sense of what enlightenment, in particular the mind of the Buddha, actually refers to. However hard it may be to actually get a sense of what that means. Buddha's mind is no longer restricted by any misapprehension or even the imprints left by these mistaken awarenesses. Therefore, the Buddha can realize the ultimate truth and the conventional truth simultaneously. Perceiving the ultimate nature of all phenomena, while also knowing their conventional existence. The same mind. Since the obscurations that are responsible for us being unable to realize the true truth are completely gone for a Buddha. The obscurations to knowing anything, to knowing all phenomena simultaneously, they have been abandoned, have been eliminated in the case of a Buddha. So while our mind can take on the aspect of an object, and in that way perceive or even know this object, yet it can only take on one or maybe 2 or 3 objects, while the Buddha's mind can take on the aspect of all phenomena. They all appear to the enlightened mind. Even if they're mere negations of something that has never existed, like inherent existence. Even such a non-affirmative negation appears to a Buddha's mind and is directly realized, directly known. While at the same time, their conventional aspect, conventional existence, that is the conventional existence of phenomena, appears and is known by that same mind. So how does the Buddha teach? How does he teach the world that is sentient beings? Explaining ultimate and conventional truth. When his mind doesn't make a plan, a teaching plan, Doesn't have to generate the intention to first say something, teach something, particular subject in a particular way, and so forth. As in our case, it's non-enlightened beings. While it is through the immense positive potential that has accumulated, but also his endless, limitless love and compassion for all sentient beings. And of course, his omniscience, his direct realization of all phenomena. That the Buddha spontaneously teaches according to their needs, predispositions, level of understanding, interests, and so forth. Of sentient beings. Who, of course, have accumulated the karma, accumulated the merit to receive these teachings. So getting a core sense what the Buddha's mind is like. It's important that we become aware of the fact that we have everything needed for our own mind to attain such an enlightened state. And that the first step towards attaining such a mind is the wish to do so. In the form of bodhicitta, the aspiration to become enlightened. Of course, carried by this deep love and compassion for all sentient beings. So now to conclude this short analysis, take a moment to single-pointedly focus on whatever inside, whatever conclusion you've come to. Allow for that to sink deeper into your mind. And then let's dedicate to make sure that the positive potential we have accumulated together here will become a cause for our enlightenment. That's dedicated, therefore. The thinking may become a cause for us to free our mind from all the obscurations that prevent it from right now actualizing its full potential. But let's direct our positive potential also towards the beings who guide us towards the enlightened state in the form of our lamas, like His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all the other great masters. May our merit cause them to have an extremely long and healthy life. So that they continue to teach us and others. But may our merit also benefit all of the sentient beings anywhere in this world and others. May it help them to reduce all their problems, cure their sickness, like in the case of Geshe and Tali Lubin and everyone else who has physical problems. And may, of course, reduce all the, or pacify all the armored conflicts. And of course, May our merit help in the way Shantideva says. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious strength. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, thank you. All that remains is to remind you for this coming week, please don't forget, after everything you learned, in particular with regard to what Buddhahood means, the enlightened mind of a Buddha means, with this knowledge to even further strengthen your mind of enlightenment, your determination to become enlightened for the welfare of all sentient beings. But of course, combining it also with your understanding of sentient beings' nature, the lack of a permanent I, a partless I, and an independent I. So combining method and wisdom by taking both into consideration, though you can't do it simultaneously, but alternating between the two. Great, and then have a wonderful week, and I'll see you again next Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good
Thank
night.
you,
Geshe Ma.
Laila
Good night.
Tom.
Thank you, Geshe Ma.
Thank
Good
you.
night. Good night.
Gute Nacht.
Gute Nacht.
Happy Vesak Day.
Thank you, Dharma friends.
Bye-bye.